Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the YouTube Creators Hub podcast. This is the conversation portion of the show where I chat with a wonderful YouTube creator, and this week is no different. Because I had some cancellations this week, I actually had this creator introduced to me by a mutual friend who has actually been on the podcast a couple of times, actually. I'm joined today by Rob from the Rob Unwraps YouTube channel, where he covers games, tech, and more. Rob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dusty. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, I tried to pull up the text that Travis sent me about your channel when we were kind of talking, and he said, hey, you need to get in touch with this guy, Rob. He's a friend of mine. He's done some really cool stuff to grow his channel, and he's a great creator, and he's got, his hands in all kinds of stuff in the gaming industry. And so I thought, you know what? Let's do it. So I reached out to you. I threw it to the wind, and you responded. You were a rock star, and so here we are today. Can you just let my audience know a little bit about the origin story of the Rob Unwraps YouTube channel and kind of how it came to be?
Sure, that's a great question. I got involved in the gaming industry probably about 11 years ago, and I started off at that time just as a columnist writing articles for different online websites. Mm-hmm. At the time, Twitch and creating YouTube videos was really kind of nascent for them. They really hadn't started doing it yet, but we decided that we'd start putting our toes in the water and feeling how it was. And we had some tremendous growth. Once I got out of that, once I got out of the games media business, I really left the YouTube and the Twitch game behind me and just kind of focused on my career. But my day job doesn't leave me room to be creative. Right. And I like to be a creative person. So I was like, what can I do to have this creative outlet back? And I was like, well, why don't I start doing YouTube again? And this was right around in 2020 when we had the global pandemic and we were all kind of trapped in our homes. Fortunately, I was able to work from my home, but it also didn't leave me a whole lot of room to go out. And I was like, well, what can I do? So I was like, I'll start working on YouTube again. And I started doing unboxings and I started doing gaming guides. And really because I wanted to talk to the broader community and have that communications with them. It wasn't necessarily about growth at the time. It was about just fostering a community and talking to individuals. And fortunately, by doing that, and I think having that, just being honest and being real with people, that it's helped grow because people see that and recognize that and relate to it.
So the channel itself, Rob Unwraps, tell me, why is it just Unwraps because of the unboxings, or is that something that is that how it started?
It kind of has a double meaning.
Okay.
And I intended that, and I don't know that it plays very well. But the point is, one, yes, it was unboxings, but it was also for guides for games, it's like unwrapping systems or unwrapping difficult concepts. It's like, oh,
I
didn't realize it worked like that. So just kind of peeling back those layers. So again, I don't know how well that works, but yes, definitely it's on the nose with the unboxings. And I didn't just want it to be Rob Unboxes. So I was like, let's try to be a little bit creative with it.
So I talk a lot about evergreen and tentpole content here on the podcast. I've had not a lot, but I've had a handful of gaming YouTubers on the podcast. You do something very different in that you do a lot of guides. Some of my favorite gaming YouTubers are people who do guides. I was actually watching one yesterday. A new big game has come out as we're recording this podcast, and I was looking up a guide for that game. And a creator that I've watched for years now, his YouTube channel is called Lucky Ghost. And he actually does a ton of very long-form beginner's guides and very technical, in-depth guides. And these guides live on for years as people continue to play these games. Can you speak on that as a strategy as you've seen your channel grow and you've done these guides and they just continue to work for you kind of month after month?
Yeah, so that absolutely does happen. And a lot of times, though, it does depend on the game. So if you're going to make guides for games that are the game of the week, don't expect those guides to live on in perpetuity. Sometimes you'll have something that is very SEO optimized. I guess maybe I could just say SEO, don't have to say the optimized, right? It's kind of in the name. But yeah, if you have something that's very SEO targeted, that could last forever. But if you make something for a game that's going to be off the charts in a month, don't expect that video to, continue to get views a month from now. However, if you're in a game like Roblox or Minecraft or something that's just our Fortnite, that's part of the cultural zeitgeist for kids these days, and you make solid content, you could expect to see growth on that for, the next 10 years, because it doesn't seem like anybody's putting those down. But if you're making guides on a game like Diablo 4, when they have constant patches, you could very easily make something that's relevant for a week, but by the time the next season comes out, it's no longer relevant. So you have to think about that when you're devoting your time to making these guides. Do I want to talk about something that people are going to have the answer to in a week, or is no longer going to be relevant? Or do I want to talk to something that people are still going to have questions about months from now?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You got to kind of pick and choose. You're right. Some of those games that have the long tail, for sure, you can kind of do the evergreen bit of content. What has been the most surprising thing for you now that you're back into the YouTube game? You're streaming over on Twitch, so you have this nice community that you've built up on YouTube, and we're certainly going to talk about transitioning to live streaming, whether it be on YouTube or Twitch, and we'll talk about that for sure. But as far as kind of what you're doing on YouTube, what's been the most surprising thing for you now that you're doing your own channel and you're trying to grow your brand and your channel?
That you really do need to niche down. It's not just like a buzzword. I think if you try to start off too broad, you'll get frustrated, because, and not to use advice from other people, but and say and pretend like it's my own, but don't think of the YouTube algorithm as like the algorithm. Think about it as your audience. You're not making videos for the algorithm. You're making videos for your audience, and your audience will come to find your channel. And if you start to make things that are not of interest to your audience, don't be surprised if no one watches it, because you may have a handful or a certain percentage that are going to watch it because it's you and they're there for you, but a lot of them are there for you and what you make. So if you start veering off of your normal content, especially when you're new, you might find out you're like, hey, I just spent 10 hours on this video. I think it's one of the best things I've ever made. And then no one watches it. You have very few return viewers.
So can you expound upon that just a bit in regards to what you did with your channel? Like, at what point did you decide to niche down? How did you niche down in regards to the gaming sector? Can you just speak on that just for a bit? Because there's folks probably listening to this thinking, I hear this term all the time. It's a buzzword, right? Like niche, whatever you want to call it, right? So explain just kind of what your process was.
Absolutely. And I just went through this recently myself. You can't just say I'm a gaming YouTuber, especially when you're new, and just randomly pick games. You can't make a video on Minecraft and then go make a game on Spider-Man and then go make a game on Tetris and then go make a game on Candy Crush, because those are all different genres of games. So you're going to spread yourself too thin. What I did is I was making at first I was kind of making guides on whatever game really struck my fancy, whatever I was playing. But now I've really focused down, and I guess you can think about niching down as focusing, picking something that you want to do and like laser in on that. So for me, it's RPGs and open world games, and where those intersect, those are now the games that I focus on. So, and fortunately, a lot of times those games have very complex systems, so they just lend themselves to guide making. And a recent example is what just came out last night, Starfield. It just falls right into that. Not only is it a gigantic game, it just falls right into that lane of games that I make guides on.
Yeah. And what made you decide to do this? Was it the numbers you were receiving, or was it the variation of numbers? Say like one video would do really well, then you do another one and it would do poorly, and then you saw what performed best on your channel and took that in combination with the types of games you like to play. What was part of that decision for you in niching down? Because some people tell me all the time, well, I'd love to do that, but how do I? I cover, I talk about cars, right? Or I talk about motorcycle or whatever it may be. What was that like as far as what made you to make that decision?
Part of it helps you focus. It helps you stay grounded. So that way you're less overwhelmed too, by the way, because if, let's say you want to make guides on games, there's new games coming out every week. You cannot, especially if you're doing this part-time, you cannot expect to cover every single brand new games. So you have to pick and choose. So find the games that align with you also. Like, I mean, make sure that it's fun for you. The last thing you want to do is get stuck in a genre that you just get burnt out on, that you just don't like, because then you could take, for some of us that this is part-time and, you know, potentially just a hobby, you make it something that you like dread doing. It's like, well, you might as well just go to the office and do your day job at that point. Right. So that's how I did it. Think a lot about too, like your own mental health. Don't make this something that stresses you out. Narrow your scope, find things that you still enjoy and focus on those. And as you do that, you are probably going to lose, you know, a portion of your audience, and that's okay. But as you focus and as you become more relevant and authoritative in that space, your audience will find you. They will be there.
Do you believe there's still room for new creators out there to start new channels? And maybe even on the back end of that question, you know, specifically gaming channels, technology channels, and niches that seem to be very saturated, which I think is funny because every niche is saturated on YouTube right now. There's so many people putting out stuff because of how easy it is. The barrier of entry is not what it once was. So do you believe it's still possible to start and grow a successful channel?
I do. And part of the reason is not only is the amount of channels growing, but the amount of people that are viewing the channels is growing as well.
Yes.
So just by virtue of that alone, there's more room on these platforms for creators. But also as you grow and go along in your journey and become a better creator, that content you make will start to rise to the top. I mean, it's just like any other industry where you have competition. If you make a better product and your price, which in this case is free, is better than your competitors, people will recognize that and come to you. So, I mean, if you're just making long form Let's Plays and throwing them up on a YouTube channel and walking away and like, why are these not performing? Well, it's because you're not putting any additional effort into it. And that has kind of gone the way of the dodo. There's a few people that could successfully do that, but that form is no longer in favor. So again, it's also not just creating the content that's already there. It's innovating on the content that's there and making it your own and finding an audience that resonates with that.
Do you mind giving an example of how you've done that with your channel, of how have you differentiated your content? You know, and in this case for you, it's in the gaming space, but for anyone listening, it could be in whatever space you're in, right? So for you, Rob, what did you do to kind of set yourself apart?
Yeah, so with the gaming videos, I've tried to edit them to where they flow better than most of the competitors. They tend to have videos that are targeted for commercials. Like you'll click on a guide and it's 8 minutes and 5 seconds. It's not a coincidence that it just barely rolls over 8 minutes.
It's for the
it's
two
8
ads,
minutes,
yeah.
so they can get that mid-roll YouTube ad.
Yeah.
My guides are very specific to the question you have. When you go to click on it, I'm going to answer your question, and I'm not going to sit there and bore you with a random story about what my dogs were up to that day so I can get that mid-roll ad on you. I'm gonna like, hi, this is Rob. This is the problem. Here's how you fix this. I hope this helped, and we're out. It's that quick. And then in addition, for my unboxings, I try to make it like you were there, right? I'm not doing a bunch of like flash cuts or crazy angles. I try to unbox it from the perspective, like you're the person standing there, opening this box, pulling this item out for the first time and looking at it and making it feel like you may not be able to purchase this, or you're thinking about purchasing this, and this is what it looks like if you were to open it up.
I got you. And what is your feelings towards vertical video? That's a hot topic as far as like YouTube Shorts. Like, how are you using those as a gaming creator? And in general, what are your thoughts on them?
I think they appeal to different audiences, but I also think that there is crossover between those audiences. So it's definitely something that if you are concerned about making sure that you're maximizing your growth, that you should focus on. I did spend 1 month earlier this year making sure that I had a short for every day on YouTube to come out to see what kind of impact it had. And typically they would perform about 1,000 to 2,000 views. And you might think, oh, that's great. That's really not great on shorts, right? That's not great. But I was able to find out what kind of did work and some of the numbers behind the shorts, what helps them get, get seen. And if anybody's out there, like, what's the biggest thing? It's your average view time is like really like one of the biggest numbers on shorts. So regardless of the length of the short, if you create a short, by the way, that's 10 seconds and it gets viewed like twice by everybody, you'd be like, oh, I got a 200% view. But if that's only 16 seconds, it's not going to get a lot of views. So if you're like, oh, why is this not working? But anyways, back to the original question. I definitely think that vertical video is something to pay attention to. It's not going away. It's rapidly growing. But there's also, if you're concerned about, monetization and the return on your effort, there's not a lot of money in ad revenue right there in shorts, especially on YouTube right now. It's going to be your long form content. So if you're debating, if you're, time is the most precious commodity for most of us, right? If you're like, what should I focus on? And you're having good growth with your long form content, I don't necessarily think that you have to stress working on shorts. But if you are doing this and you want to become full time, it's definitely not something you can ignore. It's something that you can, like say specifically, if you're doing unboxing, make sure that you have either two cameras or reshoot it, once in vertical and once in horizontal, and create your video for long form and horizontal, and then do not a quick edit. It actually takes a tremendous amount of time to edit these shorts.
It does.
To get them. Yeah, it's like a 30-second short, 45-second short takes 2 to 3 hours to edit sometimes. So don't think that it's just, I'll throw this up there and you'll get views. But yes, there's definitely there is crossover there, but there are also two different audiences. So
I do think there's a purpose for them. I do think they can help grow channels. I've said this before. I think the subscribers coming from vertical video are not as weighty as the ones coming from long form. I think the people viewing shorts use the subscribe button like a like button oftentimes because of the way that the UI is within YouTube. And unless you're in the top very, very, 1% of people on YouTube, you're not going to make any money on shorts unless you have like a product placement or something like that, a specific ad for that short, right? As far as ad revenue goes, long form is trumping short form right now. Now that may flop, that may switch at some point, but as of current recording of this show, that is the case, and it's been that way now for a pretty good while. And so I do believe there are purposes for shorts, and I've seen people I've seen some folks do like, they've taken shorts and they've made like stories out of them where they've done like part 1, part 2, all the way to like part 6 or 7, and people are really bought into it. And that goes into storytelling, right? And being a good storyteller. And I think that's one of the probably most undervalued trait as a creator. And so that kind of leads me to ask you this next question. How do you feel about storytelling as a gaming content creator? Do you feel it's at all important, and have you tried to get better at it? And what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Storytelling, I think, is one of the things that will hold people to you. So even in making a guide, for example, I recently just did a guide on how to install a SSD into your PS5. And I presented it in the form of a story. So at first, the challenge is I can't install a new game on my PS5 without deleting other games because I'm limited by the amount of storage there's internally. So that's the problem. Well, what's the solution? The solution is to get an external hard drive and install it. And then we install it. And then we have our resolution, which is now we can install the game that we wanted. So first we have the sad gamer, then we find the solution, and at the end we have the happy gamer. So it's really like a 3-act story, even in a guide. So tell that story, and it helps with retention. And that's a big thing too. If you want to find an audience and you want YouTube to help you continue to find that audience, you need to have people watch your videos from start to end.
Now let's talk about the videos themselves. What is your process from start to finish? Recording. Give us the whole 9 from idea all the way to when you publish and post-publish. What's your process like?
For me, it starts by playing the game and looking into the systems and figuring out what is overly complex and does it cause me to have a question on it. And if I start to have questions about the systems, I'm pretty sure, especially early game, that there's going to be other people out there, other gamers that have these same questions. And I'm like, okay, well, let me go ahead and start to figure out and dive deeper into the systems until I can confidently explain it to somebody else. And if you can't explain it in a short amount of time to somebody else, you don't understand it, right? And I think that there's an idiom for that for teaching. Is like if you can't explain a complex subject to somebody in like a minute, you yourself don't really understand it. So if I can't explain it to somebody relatively quickly, I continue to dig in it until I can. And then once I found the answer, then I'll go back and recapture the footage I need. I'll write a script. I'll do the voiceover, and then I will take, the A and B roll and put it together. And that's different from when I first started. When I first started, I would like capture footage and then write the script. And I found out that that is suboptimal. If you're trying to make, guide videos that way, you're making things harder for yourself. So make sure that you have a nice tight script written first, and then make sure that you go back and recapture your footage, and that will end up being easier for you.
Is it, when it comes to the content that you create, what's the recording process like, as far as like when you're recording a video? How are you recording the footage of the game?
So I use a dual monitor setup. I'll have OBS on one screen, and then I'll have the game on another screen if it's on a PC. If it's on a console, I will hook that up to my computer with an AverMedia capture card, and there's a nice utility that comes with AverMedia that is called Reek Central, and I will use that to capture my footage if I'm going from consoles. And then from there, I will go back and review the footage and chop it up. And I'm one of those people that have migrated over to DaVinci Resolve. I started off using like Blackmagic with Sony quite a while ago, and then I started to use Adobe, but then I got tired of the subscription model they had, and so I went over to DaVinci.
I have started to tinker around with DaVinci because I'm going to do some videos on that software. I've used Premiere forever, and whenever I do screencast, on my PC, I use kind of like the Elgato 4K capture, and so it's interesting to hear you mention DaVinci. So there is a lot that goes into it. I do not envy gaming creators because not only do you have to capture the game footage, you then have to do the voiceover, you then have to take the footage and scale it right, and then there's just a lot of things involved when it comes to creating content around video games. And so sometimes people think that it may be easy, but it's not. So
there's a lot involved.
Yes.
And if you're like, it's easy, it's not.
All right, so the next question that I want to ask you about is monetization. Is there money to be made in the gaming space on YouTube? How are you making money on the channel, if at all? And what are your future plans to make money from the channel and your content?
So yeah, monetization is, I think, probably something that everybody's interested in, right? Most people don't create on YouTube and then they're like, that's all I'm going to do. I never hope to see any kind of return on my time. YouTube has actually made it easier for people to be able to monetize their channels recently. They've lowered one of the metrics that they used to have as kind of like, one of the measurements. And that was, I believe it was 1,000 watch hour or 1,000 subscribers. You needed 1,000 subscribers before your channel would monetize. I think it's 4,000 watch hours is what it used to be, and 1,000 subscribers. And now they lowered that to like 4,000 watch hours and 500 subscribers, which is great because that was actually my biggest hurdle when I started off, was getting past that subscriber mark, because I had tremendous amount of watch hours, but not so much on the subscribers. Yes, there is money to be made on YouTube. Not necessarily going to be a fortune. It's really, if you're in it as a creator, to try and have this be either, a second income or eventually be your full-time career, and you're trying to pick a niche, I would actually recommend don't do gaming, because the CPM is not that high as opposed to other segments like tech or education. It's one of the lowest ones. And I think part of that has to do with the demographics of people who watch the videos. And so that, there's not a whole lot of people that have the purchasing authority watching those videos. So it lowers the amount of CPM. But there is money to be made. I do see, I do get a check every month from Google. It helps supplement and pay for and support my hobby. So I am running, in the black every month. I'm not running red. So that helps, but it's not something that's going to replace my full-time career at any point soon.
Yeah. Are you working on possibly, I know you had a history in the games media. Are you working possibly in doing, paid reviews or paid things on the channel, or is you're just going to kind of stick to the monetization strictly from the ad revenue?
Primarily, I do get my monetization through ad revenue. However, in addition to that, I am an Amazon affiliate. And so that's one thing that you can look to do early on is become an affiliate with Amazon and place links within your in the comments, or you can also pin them to your videos. And then that way, if somebody does make a purchase and they go through your links, you will get a percentage of that sale. So that's one way you can monetize. You can also do sponsored content. Very early on, in my case, I started to have peripheral manufacturers reach out and offer, they'll either give you product or sometimes they'll actually give you product and offer to pay you a little bit to do reviews. I don't necessarily suggest doing those, especially early on, because they can be inauthentic. And if you're trying to build an audience, they may look at that and like, they're just doing paid product placements. Is this really somebody I want to sub to? But maybe later on, especially if it's something that you're passionate about and you feel okay with, telling your audience that this is a product that you support. But there is, again, the ad revenue, the affiliate revenue, but be careful, especially early on with the products that people are offering you to do paid reviews on, because they do come off as inauthentic.
Yeah, I agree. When it comes to the gaming space, you can tell the difference in like a passionate, like, oh, I love games and what I'm doing, and hey, I got a code, and it was kind of those kind of things. You can really tell the difference when it comes to the YouTube state of things, as in regards to the channel itself. What is something that you wish you would have known sooner? Now that you're almost 300 videos into this thing, what is something you're looking at backwards and you're like, man, I wish I would have known that sooner. That would have helped me, get to where I am quicker.
If I was purely focused on growth, I definitely would have stuck to just one lane. And even now, like I mentioned earlier, niching down, I have an internal struggle sometimes with, I do now only focus on open world role-playing games, but I also do the hardware unboxings, right? And so sometimes I debate with myself, should I split those? Should those be separate channels? But then I come back to, I think they serve the same audience. So that's how I get away with it, because at the same time, like someone that's playing open world RPGs on a console probably cares about that newest controller, or probably care, the PC players probably care about that newest keyboard. So that's how I'm like, I think there's a lot of crossover, but at the same time, I would have said, hey, stick to a lane earlier, stay with just the open world RPGs, and not do the other games that I focused on, like the adventure games, and just left those behind and said, don't do those. Just stick to the open world RPGs. That's your core audience, and that's where you need to stay.
So just made that pivot quicker. You would have just made that change quicker.
Correct.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of folks say that. It's either that answer or I wish I would have started sooner, right? Like those are the two most common answers to this question.
That's, if anything, right? It's like, when's the best time to start something? 10 years ago. When's the second best time to start something? Now. So Don't get too hung up on the fact that you didn't start, years ago, because then you'll never start. So start now and get better.
The majority of the people who listen to this show are in the same position you're in. Now, there's a small 5% of them who are like me, and they do content creation full time, or they do a sense of kind of what I do. So with it being something that you do part time, and you have a full time job and a family and things like that, how do you manage your time? Like what are some time managing tips that you can give us as creators that have helped you continually produce consistent content and still have a life?
Don't sleep. No, no. Actually, when I was younger, and I can tell you it's not great for you, I didn't sleep a lot. I used to burn the wick at both ends, and I don't suggest doing that. And because you're just going to end up being super stressed out all the time, and it's no good. So it's like anything else. Make time for it. Schedule out time. Let people in the household know, say, hey, I've got like this product coming in a few weeks. It's going to take some of my time, but then make sure that you're also making time for everything else in your life. Getting the kids to basketball practice, still, if you're married, still dating your spouse, right? Still making time for all those things. So it does come down to effective time management. It's easier to say, it's harder to do. Make a list. There are so many productivity apps out there now. I'm not Ollie. I'm not in the productivity space. And if you guys are curious, go look at Ollie on YouTube, and you'll find out pretty quick who I'm referencing. There's many ways to help manage your time. Microsoft's got to-do list. Make a to-do list, and just start checking off things that you can find that very satisfying, at the start of your day. Plan it out a little bit. And like they say, if you don't plan, you're planning to fail. So just help organize your time, and then you'll find the time.
Yeah. Oftentimes when people tell me they don't have time, I would look at their day and I would say, no, you probably have time. You just rather do this other thing more, right?
If you find yourself doom scrolling on Twitter for a half hour, 45 minutes a day, 5 different times, well, there was your video.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, you know what, Rob, you have been an amazing guest. So I want to ask you this as we close out. What's next for the channel? Like, what do you have in, planning stages for like the short term and long term of the channel? What are your plans?
In the guide space, you can expect to see things on Starfield. We have a newest Assassin's Creed coming out. After that, you'll see Avatar from Ubisoft. There is just a ton of stuff. Spider-Man 2 from Sony. I don't know how much I'm able to get in there, but those are all games that are open world, RPG elements, and just fall right into my lane. And it's just been actually kind of overwhelming the last half of this year because we just got Baldur's Gate 3 too. So I've got plenty to do. And sometimes it feels like too much to do. But again, it goes down to planning. What do I think people are going to be interested in? And realizing that you can't do everything, right? You can't do everything. So if you're faced with a challenge like that, where it's like you've got all these big products that are coming out and you want to cover them all, figure out which ones you like the most and then go after those. And the other ones you can't, just, realize you can't do everything and let them go.
Do you have any parting advice for the creators listening to this that that you would like to tell them, whether they're looking to either start or grow or monetize or wherever they are in the journey? What would that parting bit of advice be?
Sure. If you're sitting here right now thinking, is this something I should do? I absolutely think you should. Don't be afraid to start. Don't sit there and look at things like, well, people don't want to hear what I have to say. Yes, someone's going to want to hear what you have to say. There's similar to they say there's somebody for everybody out there. There's an audience for every creator. If you have something worthwhile to say it. And if you're like, I don't have anything worthwhile to say right now, well, then wait and think about it for a little bit. And eventually you will have something that you feel passionate about, that you want to speak about, and you will find an audience and people will listen to what you have to say.
I could not agree more. Rob, thank you so much. All of Rob's links will be in the show notes of this week's episode. So if you want to connect with him, you can do so by just scrolling down and seeing his links there in the show notes. And Rob, we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Dusty.